The silence started on a Tuesday morning. My phone, usually buzzing with bank alerts by 7 a.m., stayed dead quiet on my nightstand. At 68, routine is everything. Those morning notifications telling me my pension had arrived were as reliable as sunrise. I picked up the phone, checked the signal bars, full strength. Maybe the bank's system was down. By Wednesday, still nothing. Thursday came with the same empty screen. My pension was due 3 days ago, and the silence was starting to feel wrong. I tried calling the bank's automated line, but the system wouldn't recognize my account when I entered my PIN. Something cold settled in my stomach. After 43 years of working maintenance at the same factory, my pension was the one thing I could count on. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed my cane, and decided to visit the branch in person. Whatever was happening with these notifications, I needed answers. The 10-minute drive to First National felt like an hour. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. Something was very wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. The bank teller's face changed when she pulled up my account. "Mr. Johnson, there have been several transactions this week." She turned the monitor toward me, and my heart dropped. Withdrawals from ATMs I'd never visited, online purchases for electronics I'd never buy, transfer after transfer to accounts I didn't recognize. $3,000 gone in 4 days. My hand shook as she printed the statement. Each line was a punch to the gut. Tuesday, 8:47 p.m., $500 withdrawn from an ATM on the south side. I'd been home watching the news. Wednesday, 2:15 p.m., $750 transferred to something called Quick Pay Services. I was at my doctor's appointment. Thursday morning, another $400 vanished while I was sleeping. The paper trembled in my grip. This was my pension money, my grocery money, my medication money. "These aren't mine," I told the teller, my voice cracking. "I didn't make any of these." She nodded sympathetically and called for the manager. As I waited, staring at those numbers, one thought kept circling. How did someone get past my security? Then it hit me. All these transactions needed SMS codes. Codes I never received. The bank manager, a young man in a crisp blue tie, sat across from me with concerned eyes. "Mr. Johnson, there have been several transactions this week." He turned the monitor toward me and my heart dropped. Withdrawals from ATMs I'd never visited, online purchases for electronics I'd never buy, transfer after transfer to accounts I didn't recognize. $3,000 gone in 4 days. My hand shook as she printed the statement. Each line was a punch to the gut. Tuesday, 8:47 p.m., $500 withdrawn from an ATM on the south side. I'd been home watching the news. Wednesday, 2:15 p.m., $750 transferred to something called Quick Pay Services. I was at my doctor's appointment. Thursday morning, another $400 vanished while I was sleeping. The paper trembled in my grip. This was my pension money, my grocery money, my medication money. "These aren't mine," I told the teller, my voice cracking. "I didn't make any of these." She nodded sympathetically and called for the manager. As I waited, staring at those numbers, one thought kept circling. How did someone get past my security? Then it hit me. All these transactions needed SMS codes. Codes I never received. The bank manager, a young man in a crisp blue tie, sat across from me with concerned eyes. "Mr. Johnson, it appears someone has performed what we call a SIM swap on your phone number." He explained it slowly, like I was a child, but I understood immediately. Someone had convinced my phone company to transfer my number to a different SIM card. They were getting my text messages, my verification codes, my entire digital identity. "But how?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. They would need personal information, your account number, social security, maybe answers to security questions. It's usually someone who knows the victim well. The words hung in the air like smoke. Someone who knew me well. Someone who knew I depended on those SMS alerts. Someone who knew my routines, my passwords, my mother's maiden name. My mind raced through possibilities, but one kept pushing to the front. No, it couldn't be. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces fit. The bank manager was still talking about freezing accounts and filing reports, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was remembering last month, when my son Brian had been so interested in helping me with my phone. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the ghosts of better times. The refrigerator hummed with photos held by magnets, Brian's graduation, his wedding, my grandson's first birthday. In every picture, Brian smiled that confident smile he'd inherited from his mother. But lately that smile had seemed different, forced, desperate even. 3 weeks ago, he'd visited unexpectedly. "Just wanted to check on you, Dad," he'd said, but his eyes darted around like he was cataloging my possessions. He'd asked about my pension, about whether I was managing okay financially. He'd even offered to help me set up mobile banking, reaching for my phone before I'd said yes. I thought it was concern. Now it felt like reconnaissance. The kitchen felt colder as I remembered him scrolling through my phone, asking about my passwords for safety, how he'd suggested I write them down somewhere secure in case I forgot them, how he was so insistent about knowing which bank I used, which branch I preferred. My chest tightened with each memory. These weren't the actions of a caring son. These were the moves of someone planning something terrible. The real motive became clear when I remembered the phone call from 2 months ago. Brian's voice was strained, talking fast about an investment opportunity that went bad. "Just a temporary setback, Dad. These things happen in business." But then came the request for a loan, which I'd refused. My pension barely covered my expenses, I'd explained. He'd hung up angry, and we hadn't spoken for 2 weeks. Then suddenly, he was interested in my well-being again, visiting more often, asking about my health, my finances, my phone plan. I'd been lonely enough to welcome the attention, foolish enough to think he'd finally understood my situation. Now I saw it differently. The debt collectors who'd called my house looking for him, the new car in his driveway when he claimed to be broke, his girlfriend's expensive jewelry that appeared right after my money started disappearing. The pattern was clear as day. My son hadn't gotten desperate, he'd gotten calculating. He looked at his father not as family, but as a resource to be exploited. The thought made me physically sick. But I needed more than suspicions. I needed proof that would stand up in court. I became a detective in my own life, gathering evidence like breadcrumbs leading back to betrayal. Every receipt from the bank went into a manila folder. Every timestamp got highlighted in yellow. I called the phone company and got records of the SIM swap. It happened the day after my last visit. The representative confirmed someone had called claiming to be me, armed with all my security information. I printed everything. ATM photos showing someone in a hoodie at machines I'd never visited, transaction logs proving I was at my doctor's office when money was being withdrawn across town. The paper trail grew thicker each day. I even found the smoking gun in my own phone bill. The new SIM card had been activated on a phone model I didn't own, but Brian did. My handwriting was shaky as I labeled each piece of evidence, but my resolve was steady. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the principle. It was about a son who looked at his father's trust and saw only opportunity. Each document I filed felt like building a case not just for the police, but for my own sanity. This was really happening.
The fatal clue came when I examined the transfer details more closely.
One recipient email address caught my eye: Brian2782@fastmail.com. My son's email was brianjohnson278@fastmail.com. The lazy attempt at disguise, just adding one digit, showed his arrogance. He thought I was too old, too confused to notice such details. But I'd spent 43 years reading serial numbers and specifications sheets. I knew how to spot patterns. The account received regular transfers from my savings, always just under the amount that would trigger fraud alerts. Smart, but not smart enough. I cross-referenced the transfers with Brian's social media posts. New laptop purchased the same day $800 left my account. Restaurant check-in 2 hours after a $200 withdrawal. He wasn't even trying to hide it. That's what hurt most, the contempt hidden in his sloppiness. He thought I'd never figure it out, or worse, that I'd never do anything about it if I did. I photocopied the email evidence 3 times, highlighting the connection each time. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. This was proof that my son had orchestrated the theft of his father's savings. The folder was getting heavy. Soon it would be heavy enough to carry to the police. For 2 weeks, I played the fool. When Brian visited that Sunday, I smiled and offered him coffee like nothing had changed. He sat in my living room, relaxed and confident, even asking if I needed help with anything. "You sure you're doing okay, Dad? You seem tired." The concern in his voice was perfectly pitched, but now I heard the performance in it. "Just the usual aches and pains," I replied, watching him over my coffee mug. He glanced at my phone on the side table, probably wondering if I'd noticed anything yet. I hadn't confronted him, hadn't changed my passwords, hadn't done anything that would spook him. Let him think he'd won. Let him get comfortable. He even had the audacity to borrow $20 for gas, claiming he'd left his wallet at home. I gave it to him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. As he drove away, I watched from my window. The man who'd stolen thousands from me had just taken 20 more, face to face, while looking me in the eye. That's when I knew I couldn't handle this as a father anymore. I had to handle it as a victim of a crime. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. I sat across from Detective Walker, my folder spread between us like evidence of a life falling apart. He read through each page methodically, occasionally asking for clarification. "This is your son?" he asked, though not with judgment. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The detective had seen this before, I could tell. Family theft was probably common, but that didn't make it easier. "This is solid evidence, Mr. Johnson. The email trail, the SIM swap timing, the ATM footage we can pull, it's enough for an arrest warrant." He looked at me carefully. "Are you prepared for what comes next?" I thought about Brian as a boy, learning to ride his bike in our driveway. Then I thought about him sitting in my living room, lying to me to my face while my bank account drained. "I'm prepared," I said. The detective nodded and pulled out official forms. As I signed each one, I felt like I was signing away my relationship with my son. But he'd already done that when he'd decided I was nothing more than a mark. The detective promised to move quickly but carefully. Justice would come, just not in the way Brian expected. "We can arrest him at work, at home, or in public. What's your preference?" The question hung heavy. A public arrest would humiliate him, maybe teach him shame. But I thought about Brian's pride, his need to maintain his image. A public scene would just fuel his victim complex. I said finally, "Do it at dawn, at his apartment, when he feels safest, most comfortable. Don't give him time to prepare stories or delete evidence." The detective nodded approvingly. That's tactical thinking. But it wasn't about tactics, it was about the lesson. Brian had struck when I was vulnerable,
when I trusted him most. Now he'd learn how that felt. "Will his girlfriend be there?" I asked. The detective checked his notes. "Lisa Chen, yes, probably. We've linked her to several of the transactions." So she was in on it too. The woman who'd sat at my Thanksgiving table, complimenting my cooking while planning to rob me. "Take them both," I said. The detective promised they'd move in 3 days. 3 more days of pretending everything was normal. 3 more days before my son learned that his father wasn't the fool he'd taken me for. The night before the arrest, I couldn't sleep. I sat by my bedroom window, watching the streetlights flicker and listening to the house settle. My cane leaned against the chair, and the folder of evidence sat on my nightstand like an accusation. What kind of father plans his son's arrest? But then, what kind of son steals from his father? The questions chased each other in circles until my head hurt. I thought about calling it off. One phone call to Detective Walker, and this would stop. Brian would never know how close he came to losing everything. But then I remembered the bank statement, the lies, the casual cruelty of it all. He hadn't just stolen money, he'd stolen my security, my trust, my faith in family. At 3 a.m., I made myself tea with shaking hands. The ceramic mug my wife had given me 30 years ago felt solid, real, unlike everything else in my life. Through the steam, I could see her photo on the wall. "What would you do?" I asked the silence. But I knew. She would have been heartbroken, but she would have done the same thing. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some lessons have to be taught the hard way. Dawn came gray and quiet. I drove to Brian's neighborhood and parked a block away where I could see but not be seen. The street was empty except for a few early joggers and dog walkers. At 5:47 a.m., 3 police cars rolled up silently, no sirens, no lights, just efficient authority arriving at my son's door. I gripped my cane and waited. The knock came loud and official. "Police, open the door!" The sound echoed off the apartment buildings, sharp in the morning stillness. I could see lights flicking on in neighboring windows, curtains pulling back. The second knock was louder. Then came the sound of the door opening, voices I couldn't quite make out, and movement inside. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. This was really happening. I had set this in motion, and now it was beyond my control. Through the apartment window, I saw flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, shadows moving quickly. Then the sounds that would haunt me. Confusion turning to panic, authority asserting itself, and the metal click that could only be handcuffs. My son was being arrested, and I was the one who had made it happen. Brian's scream cut through the morning air like a blade. It wasn't a word, just a raw sound of shock and fear. "What's happening? What is this?" His voice was high, desperate, nothing like the confident man who'd sat in my living room counting stolen money in his head. I could see him now, dragged out in sweatpants and a t-shirt, barefoot on the cold concrete. His hair was messy from sleep, his face pale in the growing light. The officers were professional, firm but not rough, reading him his rights while he stuttered denials. "This is a mistake. I didn't do anything. Dad, Dad!" He was looking around wildly as if I might materialize to save him. But I stayed in my car, knuckles white on my cane, watching the son I'd raised learn about consequences. They put him in the back of the first police car. Through the window, I could see him still talking, probably trying to explain, to charm his way out like he'd always done. But charm doesn't work on handcuffs. The officers weren't listening to his stories. At that moment, I felt alone in my car, but not in the way that I'd been. It had been a long journey to get to this point, but the major decisions I made were critical in getting justice for my son.
They had evidence, they had a warrant, and they had a job to do. My son had become just another criminal to them, and that's exactly what he was. Lisa came out fighting. She'd tried to run, grabbing a bag that the officers immediately confiscated. Even from my distance, I could see cash spilling out of it. My cash, probably. She was screaming about lawyers, about rights, about misunderstandings. But the female officer handling her was unmoved, professionally patting her down and reading her rights with the same calm efficiency. "That's not mine," Lisa kept saying about the bag. "I don't know anything about this." But the evidence would show otherwise. Her fingerprints were on the deposits. Her account had received transfers. She'd been there when Brian had used my information, probably helping him figure out my security questions. The woman who'd smiled at me across my dinner table was being arrested in her pajamas, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. They put her in the second police car. Through the back window, I could see her crying now, the fight gone out of her. Reality was setting in. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't easy money from a confused old man. This was prison time, criminal records, destroyed futures. They'd gambled with my life savings and lost everything. I finally got out of my car, needing to see this through to the end. Leaning heavily on my cane, I walked to the corner where I could watch without being noticed. The morning sun was coming up properly now, painting the sky pale orange. Normal people were starting their normal days, while my world was ending and beginning all at once. The police were searching the apartment, carrying out boxes of evidence. Computers, phones, documents. How much of my life would they find in there? Photos of me they'd used to answer security questions. Notes about my routine. Plans for what to do with my money? I stood there, an old man with a cane, watching justice happen in real time. No satisfaction filled me, no joy, just a deep, heavy exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. This was what it felt like to choose justice over family, to choose what was right over what was easy. A neighbor approached me, curious about the commotion. "What happened?" she asked. "Someone got caught," I said simply. She nodded and moved on, not recognizing me as the father of the man in handcuffs. Just another old man watching the morning drama unfold. As the first police car pulled away, Brian's face turned toward the window. Our eyes met across the distance. Time stopped. His expression changed from confusion to recognition to something I'll never forget. The realization that I had done this. His father had turned him in. His mouth opened, forming words I couldn't hear. Maybe my name, maybe a curse, maybe a plea. But the car was already moving, taking him away from the life he'd built on stolen money. That look would stay with me forever. Not anger, not even betrayal, just shock that I'd actually done it. He calculated everything except the possibility that his father would fight back, that the old man he'd dismissed as weak would be strong enough to choose justice over blood. The car turned the corner and disappeared. Lisa's car followed, then the evidence van. The street returned to its morning quiet, as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. I'd just watched my son get arrested for crimes I'd reported. There was no going back from this moment, no pretending we could reconcile. This was the end of us, and we both knew it. The bank restored my SIM card that afternoon. The young technician worked quickly, transferring my number back to my control. "There you go, Mr. Johnson. You should start receiving your alerts again immediately." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Pension deposited. Balance update. Transaction notification. All the messages that had been going to Brian's phone flooded back to mine. Each beep felt like a small victory and a huge loss combined. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, watching the notifications pile up. My money was safe. My identity was mine again. But the cost was everything. The alerts that used to comfort me now felt hollow. They were just numbers on a screen, not worth a sun. But then I remembered it wasn't about the numbers. It was about the betrayal, the planning, the willingness to destroy his father's security for his own gain. I drove home to my empty house, phone buzzing with the regular rhythm of a life restored to normal. But nothing would ever be normal again. Every pension deposit would remind me of what Brian had tried to steal. Every alert would carry the weight of what I had to do to stop him. The family backlash came swift and harsh. My sister Nancy called first, her voice shrill with accusation. "How could you have your own son arrested? He made a mistake." A mistake, like he'd broken a vase, not stolen thousands. My brother Tom was next, saying I should have handled it privately, within the family. "You don't involve police in family matters," as if there was some rule book for when your son robs you. Cousins, aunts, family friends, they all had opinions. Some said I was too harsh. Others whispered that I should have seen it coming, should have helped him before he got desperate. But a few understood. My neighbor Mr. Gerald, whose daughter had emptied his savings account 3 years ago, shook my hand. He said, "You did what I couldn't. You stood up for yourself." The family divide was clear. Those who'd been betrayed understood. Those who hadn't thought I was heartless. But they hadn't sat in that bank, seeing their life savings disappear. They hadn't felt their own child's contempt. The phone rang continuously until I unplugged it. Let them talk. Let them judge. They didn't have to live with what Brian had done. 3 weeks later, the call came from county jail, a collect call from Brian Johnson. I stared at the phone, heart pounding, before accepting the charges. His voice was different, smaller. The confidence was gone, replaced with something broken. "Dad!" Just that one word carried so much weight. "I'm here," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. "Why did you do this to me?" The question was plaintive, like a child's, as if he was the victim here. "The question is why you did this to us," I replied. Silence. Then, "I was desperate. The debts, the pressure. Lisa said it would be easy, that you'd never notice, that you had enough." "I notice every penny, Brian. That money was my survival." I know that now," he cracked. "I'm sorry." "Sorry you got caught? Or sorry you did it?" More silence. That was answer enough. "Dad, please. The lawyer says if you drop the charges—" I hung up. There was nothing left to say. He still didn't understand. He was still looking for the easy way out, still trying to manipulate his way free. The phone rang again immediately. I didn't answer. Some conversations were better left unfinished. Late at night, I sat in my wife Martha's old rocking chair, the one she'd nursed Brian in 35 years ago. What would she think of all this? Would she have forgiven him? Would she have been stronger than me or weaker? Martha always saw the best in people, especially Brian. Even when he disappointed us as a teenager, she'd found excuses. "He's finding himself," she'd say. But this, stealing from his father, planning it, executing it, lying about it, I don't think even Martha's generous heart could have overlooked this. Or maybe she would have. Maybe she would have found a way to forgive that I couldn't. The chair creaked as I rocked, the sound filling the empty house. Brian's childhood photos watched me from the walls. His first day of school, his high school graduation, his wedding. Had the signs been there all along? Had I missed some crucial moment when teaching him right from wrong? Or had he learned the lessons and simply chosen to ignore them? The question tortured me nightly. Where had I failed as a father? Where had I failed at all? Maybe some people just choose wrong, regardless of how they're raised. The news came through Detective Walker. Lisa had flipped, taking a plea deal in exchange for testimony. She documented everything, Brian's planning, the way he'd studied my routine, how he'd practiced my voice for the phone company. She'd even kept recordings of him laughing about how easy it was to fool me. She's claiming he manipulated her, the detective said. Says she wanted to stop, but he threatened her. I didn't believe that. I'd seen her counting my cash. But betrayal breeds betrayal, and now Brian was learning that lesson. His girlfriend was painting him as the sole mastermind to save herself. The woman he'd trusted was destroying him to reduce her own sentence. There was poetic justice in it. He'd betrayed his father's trust, and now his partner was betraying his. The detective said Brian's lawyer was scrambling, trying to dispute Lisa's testimony. But she had receipts, texts, evidence Brian thought had been deleted. His arrogance had been his downfall twice. First with me, now with her. He'd assumed everyone was as easily manipulated as he thought I was. Now he was learning otherwise from a jail cell. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, Brian's handwriting shaky on the envelope. Inside, 3 pages of apologies, explanations, and requests. He was sorry. He'd been influenced by others. He'd pay me back. He needed his father's forgiveness. Could I visit, please? I read it 3 times, looking for genuine remorse between the manipulations. It was there, maybe, buried under the self-pity and excuses, but it was too little, too late. He wanted me to see him behind bars, to witness his suffering and feel guilty enough to help. But seeing my son in prison orange wouldn't heal anything. It would just add another layer of pain to an already unbearable situation. I held the visitation form for a long time. 1 signature, and I could see him. 1 signature, and maybe we could start to repair something. But my hand wouldn't move. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. I filed the letter with the evidence folder, unsigned. Let him sit with the consequences of his choices. Let him understand that actions have prices that apologies can't pay. I chose silence, and silence was my answer. The community response surprised me. Neighbors I barely knew started approaching me at the grocery store, at the bank, on my walks. "Mr. Johnson, I heard what happened. You did the right thing." They shared their own stories. Mrs. Kim's nephew had drained her account while she was in the hospital. Mr. Peterson's son had taken out credit cards in his name. Mrs. Wallace's daughter had sold her jewelry while pretending to help her move. We were a silent club of the betrayed, finally finding our voices. "I wish I'd been as strong as you," Mrs. Kim said. "I let him get away with it. Now he's in prison anyway for doing it to someone else." Their stories formed a chorus of validation. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't heartless. I was just someone who'd refused to be a victim, even when the criminal was my own blood. These strangers understood what my family couldn't. Sometimes love means letting someone face justice. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right choice. Their support didn't ease the pain, but it reminded me I wasn't alone. Betrayal by family was more common than anyone admitted. I'd just been brave enough to do something about it. The cruel math was simple. Money could be replaced. It was just numbers in an account. The $3,000 Brian stole would return with my next pension deposits. The security of my accounts could be restored with new passwords and cards. The trust, that was gone forever. You can't rebuild trust like you rebuild a bank balance. Every memory of Brian was now tainted with the knowledge of what he'd been capable of. Every photo became evidence of my blindness. Every happy moment was retroactively poisoned by his betrayal. Had he been planning this for years? Had every visit been reconnaissance? Had every "I love you, Dad" been a lie? The questions would never have answers. Even if Brian told me the truth, I'd never believe him again. That's what he'd really stolen. Not just money, but my ability to trust my own son. The father in me wanted to forgive, to find a way back to when he was just my boy, but the man in me knew better. Some things, once broken, stay broken. Some people, once revealed, can't be unseen. Brian had shown me who he really was. The tragedy wasn't that I'd lost a son to prison. It was that I'd lost him to greed long before that. The morning was crisp and clear when I saw the prison van pass my house. They were transferring Brian to the state facility where he'd served 2 to 5 years. I stood at my window, leaning on my cane, watching the vehicle disappear down the street. Inside was my son, heading to pay for his crimes against me. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. I simply stood there, breathing in and breathing out, feeling the weight of everything and nothing all at once. Justice had been served, but victory felt hollow. Fatherhood had been buried under legal documents and evidence folders. Love had been suffocated by greed and betrayal. The van turned the corner, taking Brian out of my life, possibly forever. The sirens faded into the distance, and I was left in the silence of my empty house. Photos on the walls showed a family that no longer existed, a father and son who'd become victim and criminal, a relationship reduced to a case number. As I turned from the window, one truth settled into my bones like winter cold. Money lost can be recovered. I'd already proven that. But a son lost to greed? That loss was permanent. Brian wasn't coming back even if he someday got out of prison. The son that I raised was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who looked at his father and saw only a target. That was the real theft, and it was one that could never be repaid.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also, check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.